Thank you, everyone, for being here. We start our public hearings this evening. The first item is a petition annexation AX 0923.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Christopher Golden with Planning and Development. This might look a little familiar. This is AX 0923 in the 4200 block of Watkins Road. So this particular annexation is accompanied by a rezoning, Z1323. It's familiar because you saw it this morning at the, or I should say in the afternoon, at the 1 p.m. hearing. It was on the agenda as a special item, and it was essentially, it was, the action was deferred to 11/21 so that signatures could be, well, signatures were received, but to get some revised conditions on that. So the suggested action for this one is to open the hearing and continue that, continue the annexation to November 21st so it could pair up with the rezoning. I also did want to mention that the blurb on that, on the annexation, incorrectly lists the zoning for that what is it, that Z1323 annexation. It incorrectly indicates that it currently rezoned R40, Wake County, and looking to go for CX5 conditional use, RX3. That is incorrect. It's actually R4 Raleigh for the portion in Raleigh, and the portion in Wake County is R30, and they're looking to rezone that to R6 and R6 conditional use. So wanting to align that just because the annexation has to take place first before the rezoning can take place, so that's why we're looking for that November 21st. If you have any questions, more than happy to answer them.
Okay. Anybody have any questions? Okay, we will do what you suggested then, and nobody has signed up to speak in support or opposition, so I'll open the hearing. And I guess then I will make a motion to continue this to November 21st.
Okay.
So moved.
Second. You mean a second?
Oh.
I made a motion to
Oh,
do,
second.
okay, second, okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that was unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is rezoning Z1723.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening. Bynum Walter Planning and Development. This is Z1723 at 1504 Jones Franklin Road. The public hearing was opened back in October. As a reminder, this is consistent with the comprehensive plan, but it would result in a future land use map amendment. Planning Commission recommended approval. The applicant has revised their petition since you saw this last. The prohibition on uses stands. They have added a condition addressing tree planting along Jones Franklin Road, which is the eastern frontage for this property. For non-residential uses, they've provided that understory trees would be planted at a minimum of 3.5 feet behind the sidewalk. I will note that's a change from what's published in the packet. The sign conditions responded to staff comment that a foot was inadequate accommodation for root ball, so they've pushed back from the sidewalk a little bit. And then that they would be spaced 20 feet apart, and of course subject to review and approval by NCDOT and Raleigh Forestry. So I would just note there's some overhead power lines here which prohibit shade tree, which means that they can put the plant understory trees a little bit closer together. So that's the update on the condition. Happy to answer questions for you here from the applicant if there's any additional information you might want.
So this afternoon we were talking about the change on Jones Franklin Road, trying to move from 6 to 4 lanes. And so we had some discussion around whether there needs to be a condition related to that in this case, given that this case is going to go through before that change to the comprehensive plan would be allowed to be approved. And so that's just something I wanted to hear, I guess, maybe from the applicant and also from planning about whether anything is needed in that regard. Because I know we had some discussion about, if they move forward immediately on a site plan, what would that look like if we're trying to make this change from 6 to 4 lanes?
Right, so Council did authorize this afternoon a map amendment, a map T1 amendment in the comprehensive plan to change the street plan from 6-lane avenue divided to 4-lane avenue divided. That does reduce, once applied, that does reduce the right-of-way dedication requirement. I think given that you all have made the authorization, that Development Services would probably take that into account in evaluating and reviewing. And I think it's a little bit questionable that site plan would get through review before that amendment. That seems like they would probably time pretty similarly.
Okay.
And so the difference in right-of-way, the 6-lane requires 40 feet, and then the 4-lane would, of additional right-of-way dedication plus whatever slope easement, curb or gutter, sidewalk. And then the 4-lane would then require only an additional 30 feet of roughly of right-of-way additionally. Yeah.
Okay. And then just to clarify about this new condition, these understory trees, this is in addition to, I mean, there wouldn't have to be trees there otherwise. And
Yes, there would have to be trees there. What they're doing is guaranteeing a denser planting than what might otherwise be required.
okay.
They're offering the densest planting that can be offered to provide a more solid tree mass
Okay.
in response to comments they heard at public hearing last time.
Okay. All right. That's all the questions for me for now.
Okay. All right, we will call the applicant, Brendy Vega.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Really don't have anything to add from what Bynum just went through. And we were expecting to hear about the comp plan amendment today. So thank you for authorizing that. And like Bynum said, I don't believe that we would get to a site plan any sooner than a comp plan amendment, just based on not having an end user for this site. So I'd be happy to answer any other questions you might have.
Any additional questions? Okay, then I will close the hearing.
I'm prepared to make a motion. I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated November 7th, 2023, contained in the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning amendment with the adoption and effective dates described in the agenda item under recommended action. This approval is also deemed an amendment to the future land use map to the extent described in the adopted consistency statement.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, that was unanimous. All right, next we have rezoning Z 2023.
Good evening. I'm Margaret Tartala, the staff planner for case C 2023, which is 501 Hillsborough Street. This is a request to rezone a little over an acre from downtown mixed use 12 stories shopfront frontage to downtown mixed use 40 stories shopfront frontage with conditional uses. The request is consistent with the comprehensive plan, and Planning Commission recommended approval 8-1. This is an aerial to situate you to where the site is. It's downtown, just to the east of the railroad tracks, between Hillsborough and Morgan Street. In terms of landmarks, it's just north of Morgan Street Food Hall, just south of the 400H apartments, which are under construction currently, and about a block to the east of One Glenwood. This is what the site looks like from a street view. The current structures in the site are one-story buildings, and there is a surface parking lot to the southwest part of the site. There are two proposed conditions. The first prohibits some uses on the site. The second would require the property owner to pay $40,000 per unit for 1% of approved units into an affordable housing fund, a city affordable housing fund. This table summarizes what could be built under the proposed zoning versus the current zoning. You can see that the maximum number of dwelling units would more than triple under the proposed zoning, and office square footage would about triple. The request is consistent with the comprehensive plan. There are several policies in the comprehensive plan that are consistent with this request. This first slide mostly concentrates on policies that are supportive of having housing, transportation choices, and a mix of uses. The second slide of policy is focused on wanting to have high density and mixed uses in the downtown area. No inconsistent policies were identified. Again, Planning Commission found this request reasonable and in the public interest. And I can answer any questions that you have.
Okay. Councilmember Ford?
What was the dissenting vote based on at the Planning Commission?
So I actually went back and listened to it because I wasn't sure. I don't think it was very explicit, but the dissenter was Commissioner Peeler, and I believe it was concerns over not providing affordable housing, the actual units, instead of amount being paid into the fund.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, there's no one signed up in opposition, so I'm going to open up the hearing.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Toby Coleman, 150 Fayetteville Street, here on behalf of the property owner. I don't really have much to add to the presentation. Certainly can. The only slide really in this presentation is something that shows all of the other 40-story rezonings downtown. So just so you see it, just to show that it's very consistent with what's going on around in this area. If you have any questions, happy to answer them.
Councilmember Jones?
With all of these 40-story buildings, and I know you can't speak for all of them, but for your site, how do you plan to deal with trash? I've been speaking with our solid waste services over the last few months, and their concern for downtown is how we handle trash moving forward, especially as we increase density. So I'm wondering if you've had those conversations with them and what your thoughts are as we bring that much density to the area.
There were a fair amount of discussions initially. So this property sort of similar to some of the other projects you've seen recently, was actually, there was a development plan for under the existing 12-story zoning. And so it went through site planning review and discussion about trash, access, all of sort of the typical issues you have in downtown. And so there were some discussions at that point, and I believe that what they were going to do was have a sort of an access area for a dumpster or trash to come in. What happened, just to give you the background on what happened, basically around the end of last year, obviously interest rates started spiking, the economy changed, and as a result of that, immediate prospects sort of, there was a decision made, I guess is the best way to say it, that 2023 was not going to be the year where a tall building was started at this site. And so with that, they decided to seek additional entitlement. So that's a long way of saying they've looked at it for a 12-story building. I don't know how it would change for a 40-story building. I don't know. They know how it would change, because a lot of this is sort of looking forward and saying, we believe in downtown Raleigh, and we believe in that there's opportunity and interest in something more than a 12-story building that was previously planned here. I think it was actually 7 stories, but under the 12-story zoning.
No, for sure. I'm just, as we begin to do this and we think we have in 2040, our landfill is done in Wake County, and we're trying to plan for those. So I'm just wondering how, as we're approving these sites, how we're going to be great partners together to make sure that we're answering those questions. Because I don't want to bring all these people in, and in 2040, I mean, it's not going to be that way, but, I'm going to worst case scenario. So thank you.
Having composting services help.
That's right. That's right. And there are growing compost services, Compost Now and some of the others.
That's what we have, and it really does make a difference. So, Any other questions? Councilmember Patton?
Yeah, hey. I believe the applicants who have come for recent 40-story rezonings and have made contributions to our affordable housing fund have based their condition around the entitlement and not the approved unit. So that does strike me as a little bit different than the precedent that we've seen on some other cases. Was that part of your conversations? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. I actually copied it pretty much from the prior rezonings. So I think there's been some confusion around that, and I don't want to speak for anybody else. So I won't get into specifics about what anybody else believes that have said or believes that they've said. We have had specific conversations about that and some discussions about how this provision might be revised, I think is the best way to say it. There's been some discussions about could we do something other than just based on whatever the permitted number of units are. The concern, to be real, again, to sort of lay our cards on the table, the concern is that if you going up to 808 units from you could have a pretty significant contribution, which is all well and good. The concern is that you probably only see about 300 units of apartments on the site just because of various concerns in terms of financing these apartments and stabilizing them. And so there are we looked at, should we cap the units? Should we do something else? Ultimately, to maintain the maximum amount of creativity, we decided not to cap the units, and that's why we're looking for some sort of in-between approach here. And so we're working on that, I think is the short answer.
So it sounds like you're open to revision or creativity in that condition.
We are actively working on it, I think is what I say. And happy to discuss that with you further.
Any other questions? Okay, Councilmember Harrison?
Yeah, no questions at this time. I'm just going to recommend that we hold this to have some further conversations and bring it back at our November meeting. I think that's November 21st in the
Yes.
afternoon.
Is that a motion?
That would be my motion.
Second.
What's the conversation down there?
We just have a pretty full agenda.
How many cases do we have that afternoon? Like in the,
8 already, I think.
We're right at 5 rezonings, and then there are a handful of annexations that go with that. So I think we're probably around maybe 8 items-ish.
what about December 5th?
That's much heavier already.
Okay. I might just have to work that day then.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think we have an opportunity to have a lighter load until January. So I'm going to recommend, just keep with the November 21st date if we can do that.
Okay, that's a motion. Do we have a second? Second. Seconded by Councilmember Fort. All in favor? Aye. Okay, that was unanimous. Thank you. See you back on the 21st. Next, we have rezoning Z2523, Pool Road.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So this is a request to rezone about 3/4 of an acre in East Raleigh on the north side of Pool Road, close to the border with Knightdale. If approved, it would amend the future land use map to neighborhood mixed use, and Planning Commission has unanimously recommended approval. So it is just west of the Neuse River Trail, almost adjacent on the other side of Riverview Road from the Pool Road canoe launch. Zoning in the area is mostly low scale, or the uses in the area are mostly low scale residential. There is some commercial zoning, but that land is vacant. Some additional views of the site. The site itself is also currently vacant. The applicant has offered 4 zoning conditions, limiting the total number of residential units to 12, limiting the hours of operation for any commercial uses to between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m., prohibiting bars, taverns, and nightclubs, and prohibiting parking between the buildings and Pool Road. Looking at the existing versus proposed zoning, the existing zoning is R6 conditional use. The proposed zoning is neighborhood mixed use, 3 stories conditional use. It would increase the allowable units up to 12. And then because it's a mixed use district, the setbacks would change provided two sort of views of how the entitlement would change here, and it would permit some office and retail square footage where none is allowed under the R6 district. Consistent with the comprehensive plan overall, as noted before, it is inconsistent with the future land use map, which designates the area low-scale residential. The consistent policies are related to reducing vehicle miles through mixed use, providing some retail in an area that doesn't have much, as well as complementary land uses and urban vitality, housing variety, and infill compatibility. Inconsistent policies being the future land use map inconsistency, and also of note, this area is outside standard fire response times. Again, would amend the future land use map from low-scale residential to neighborhood mixed use. And the Planning Commission recommends approval, finding that it would increase the housing supply, allow a range of housing types, and also allow for limited commercial uses in an area not well served by retail. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem?
Not really a question, but just a point out. There's a part here is marked R4 where Barwell and Pool Road meet, but there's actually a convenience store right there in that spot. So even though it's zone R4, I guess we place R4 on it after it's been there for decades. But I just want to help council members know what's in the area.
Okay. Any additional questions? Councilman Patton?
Hi. I know this is an area of town where we have some fire service considerations. Do you happen to have the response times for this area?
I could pull those up. I don't know if, I think Lorraine is here and can speak to that for you. Yeah.
And while she's coming up, also, they have not asked for annexation at this time.
Hi. So the nearest engine is engine 12, which is 3 minutes away, and then engine 26 is 4 minutes away. The only standard that it's not meeting is the 8-minute full alarm standard, with your second ladder, which is ladder 1 downtown, 30 minutes away, and your fourth engine is 10 minutes away at Station 10, Sanderford Road.
Okay, any additional questions? Okay, I'm going to open the hearing. We have no one signed up in opposition. We have Katie Minton signed up representing the applicants.
Hi, good evening. As you said, my name is Katie Minton. I work at Progressive AE as a project manager, and I am the architect on this project. There are a few things we want to walk through, and I know that Sarah had mentioned quite a few of them here, but let's just... So this is kind of showing another view of what this site looks like right now. And as mentioned, there is commercial that is directly across the street in this area. There is also commercial that is further down Pool Road. That is, so it's not just housing, but there isn't a whole lot of commercial, but there is some there. So, and that includes just directly across the road from where this is. I think that one of the things we really want to point out is we have this canoe launch. We have this great little, area that you can access where this News River Trail is. And right now, there's not really a lot of parking or any accommodations for that. So one of the things we really want to do is actually provide parking that would not only support the residential that we are proposing to put on it and the commercial, but it would also potentially, hopefully, provide some parking that would be for public use. So that's going to help us to keep parking off of Pool Road. I know that there's been currently a widening project, and that there's been a lot of conversation about there being a lot of traffic in this area. So one of the things that we are doing as our proposed rezoning conditions, we've been listening to what the neighbors have been saying. We want to make sure that we are staying within a scale of the site, and that we're offering some great neighborhood supporting amenities. So For one thing, we would propose that we would have 2 levels of parking, and then we would surround it with retail, so you don't actually see like a parking deck, right? But it would provide a lot of parking in that area, and we would have 1 level of apartments, and we're saying as part of a rezoning condition that we would limit that to 12, so 12 apartments. Another thing that we've heard a lot about is that, we want something more affordable in the area other than just the single-family homes. These aren't, technically ranked as, affordable housing, but just by their nature, they are more affordable than what is in the area. Some of the things that we were thinking about for some of these neighborhood spaces would be things like, coffee shops or juice bars or bike repair place. It would really help to activate the community, I think, not only for people who might be visiting for this trail, but also for the people who actually live there. Even maybe there could be a canoe rental, and then people can take their families and have a weekend, and they can walk down the street to it. It's pretty cool. Let me make sure I show you some of these perspectives before any time is up. Please keep in mind, these are basically massing and just an idea. So the tenants here would kind of activate, what that ground level would be. Based on, again, the parking and making sure that we are providing more parking. Another condition that we are also offering is that we would prevent any parking on that Pool Road side. So here you can see it from the back. And we could even offer maybe a rooftop amenity in this little area that's kind of like right close to where you would actually go into that canoe landing. Here you go. So here we're showing, we're proposing that we would have 57 spaces on these 2 levels of parking and the 12 apartments on top. And just to make sure that we've revisited what we're proposing here for our proposed conditions. So we would limit the number of apartments. We would restrict business hours of the commercial spaces, so it'd be from like 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. That should prevent, I think that was a worry that there would just be too much noise, late at night. So I think that would help with that. We would restrict the businesses to prohibit any sort of bars. And again, as I had just mentioned, no parking would be allowed between the new buildings and Pool Road. And really, that's sort of the majority of it. So I'd be happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Okay. Councilmember Harrison?
Thanks for showing the design. It's very exciting. I guess I'm curious about a couple of items. So you'd mentioned perhaps there would be public parking that would help people access the, trail and the river. And then you've got the retail, but just to be clear, there's no conditions that would require those things. Those are just kind of hopes.
We're offering them. Yeah, and we just are trying to make sure that we are not creating more parking from other places. We're making sure we accommodate everything that we would be adding for our residents and for our retail, plus some additional, hopefully, for people who are going to go for the canoe drop-offs and things like that, they're going to be there anyway.
Sorry, just maybe I'm missing something. You're saying you would definitely be offering this parking, but I don't see that in the conditions.
It's in our proposed plan for the 2 levels of parking and 1 level of apartments on top for the 3 stories, but yeah.
Yeah, just to clarify, there aren't zoning conditions that guarantee parking, but it is in your renderings. But the renderings are typically part of the rezoning decision.
Okay.
Okay, so it's part of your plan, what you're planning to do, but not necessarily what's required on the site.
Yeah,
Okay, that's what I just wanted to clarify.
Okay.
Do you have plans to start this soon if you're approved? I mean, how?
We would like to, yes. And we have one of our owners are here as well. They're very, very invested, very involved. I don't know if he wants to speak to that at all, but really it's as soon as we can get approval. I think this is a really exciting project and we want to get started as soon as we could.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to close the hearing.
Did you have a question? Okay. I definitely want to thank you for your work. Thank you for everything you put in the meetings and the time. So I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated November 7th, 2023, contained in the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning amendment with the adoption effective dates described in the agenda items under recommended action. This approval is also deemed an amendment to the future land use map to the extent described in the adopted consistency statement.
Do we have a second? All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, that was unanimous. Thank you. All right, next we have Comp Plan Amendment 423, Downtown Transition Areas.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, City Council members. My name is Matthew Burns with Planning and Development. CP 423 is a privately initiated request to amend map DT2, Downtown Transition Areas. On the right, don't think it's showing up on the screen. Thank you. On the right, you can see the existing downtown transition areas in teal. This request would expand the downtown transitions into the areas in red near the Glenwood Brooklyn neighborhood. If approved, this amendment would provide Glenwood Brooklyn neighborhood and residents and property owners with additional separation from potential future development. The amendment would also change policy that guides rezoning requests with regard to land use, density, and height in the area, including ongoing transit corridor studies, planned parks, and future redevelopment opportunities. At their September 12th meeting, Planning Commission recommended unanimous denial of the request. On the left is the latest version of map DT2 taken from the 2030 Comprehensive Plan, showing downtown transitions located near or partially within Raleigh's downtown core. Areas in white and teal mark the extent of downtown Raleigh as defined by map DT1. The areas in teal are the extent of downtown transition areas as defined by map DT2. For context, the comprehensive plan includes various policies and one action in support of transitions, buffering, and compatibility in and around downtown Raleigh. The overall purpose of these transition zones is to manage change between areas of different development intensities, which is accomplished through controls of uses, scale, height, and building materials. This slide compares existing downtown transitions and the area of request with local historic overlays nearby. There are two types of HODs, both of which regulate building design, architectural features, landscaping, fencing, setbacks, and parking. Glenwood Brooklyn, shown in orange, features a street side HOD, which regulates what can be seen from the street. This is an aerial of the northern part of the request. CP 423 includes two separate areas. This area is located on the east and west sides of Northwest Street and comprises 31 parcels. They're bordered by Capitol Boulevard to the east, Wade Avenue to the north, Railroad right-of-way to the west, and Peace Street to the south. Two parcels in Area 1 are owned by the City of Raleigh. The first at 1027 Northwest Street is approximately 3 acres and used by City of Raleigh Engineering. The second, located at 1014 Northwest Street, is approximately 14 acres and is the proposed location of the Smoky Hollow Park and includes the recently opened Conlin Family Skate Park. Existing zoning in Area 1 is predominantly industrial mixed use and heavy industrial. The parcels between Northwest Street and the railroad tracks have depths ranging between 90 feet and 170 feet, with a few areas as deep as 200. Without assemblage, the dimensions of these lots may limit building height in this area as they likely constrain options for structured parking. Additionally, while these parcels are included in downtown on the urban form map, they're designated on the future land use map as office and residential mixed use, which suggests heights of no more than 7 to 12 stories. In contrast, the parcels on the east side of West Street are included in downtown on the urban form map and designated as central business district on the future land use map, which supports heights of up to 40 stories. The railroad right-of-way varies between approximately 75 and 100 feet. The combination of railroad right-of-way, West Street right-of-way, and parcels on the west side of West Street effectively create a physical barrier and physical transition to connectivity between Glenwood, Brooklyn, and new development to the east. Unlike other neighborhoods bordered by downtown transition areas, vehicular traffic from future development will not have direct access from the east into the neighborhood. Future land use designations in this area include office and residential mixed use, central business district, and public parks and open space. Area 2 comprises 13 parcels and most of the block bordered by Peace Street to the north, Johnson Street to the south, West Street to the east, and Glenwood Avenue to the west. Area 2 is predominantly zoned downtown mixed use with heights ranging between 3 and 7 stories. All of the zoning districts in Area 2 feature shopfront frontage, which is intended to create a main street type of environment around mixed-use buildings where the highest levels of walkability are recommended. Area 2 features a variety of uses and businesses, including offices, retail, bars, and restaurants. Railroad right-of-way splits this area in two. The single parcel to the east of the railroad tracks is owned by Norfolk Southern. The future land use designation in this area is Central Business District. Areas 1 and 2 are both within walking distance of the Wake BRT Northern Corridor along Capitol Boulevard, shown here in dark gray. It is currently undergoing a major investment study. Currently, there's a BRT station planned for this area, which is expected to be located along Capitol Boulevard and Peace Street, shown on screen with a yellow star. The exact location will be finalized during the next phase of the investment study. The options being considered for a BRT station are within walking distance of the area in question. Staff identified 11 comprehensive plan policies consistent with the request. These generally focus on a common theme of transitions, buffering, and compatibility. The requested amendment is considered consistent with these policies since it would facilitate tapering density and intensity between downtown Raleigh and Glenwood, Brooklyn. Staff identified 12 comprehensive plan policies inconsistent with the request. These span a broad range of topics, including downtown, density, housing, transit, and transportation. The requested amendment would introduce policy guidance for lower heights and limit the range of uses, thereby rendering it inconsistent with these policies. At their September 12th meeting, the Planning Commission recommended unanimous denial of the request because the proposed transition area was not subject to area planning and in conflict with policies in the comprehensive plan. That concludes my presentation, and staff is available to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Do we have any questions of staff? Okay. All right, I'm going to open the hearing then. One person is signed up in support, 2 in opposition. We'll start with Roy Ottride.
Good evening. Just waiting for the presentation to come up.
Thank you for your patience as we try and work through this.
Here, I'll give you my phone. John? Looks like we have an issue. Drainage.
And I did get something from the before, but when the attorney opposed Senate.
I didn't get it, Yeah, I just got it 3 minutes ago, so maybe Kim will send it out soon, but it's at 4:30 on Thursday.
All righty. Are we ready? Roy Attride, 501 Cleveland Street, the petitioner for the change to the comprehensive plan. We're going to talk a lot about the data that supports height restrictions in this area, as well as the transition area itself. This is a rendering of an application that was put forth showing how high 30 stories is next to the neighborhood. These are no longer theoretical challenges that are facing our neighborhood. Incompatible land uses and incompatible height are real, and we need protection. All other named neighborhoods in and around downtown have transition areas, except for Glenwood Brooklyn. There could be said that at the point in time transition areas were completed for this comprehensive plan, they weren't necessary. But given the amount of height and incompatible land uses, they're certainly necessary now. Background on the historic Glenwood Brooklyn neighborhood, several hundred historic homes, a lot of infill, nationally and city registered historic district, named in the comprehensive plan and by name in several instances. The city spent a lot of time on the comprehensive plan, as many people know. We're actually below our population target at this point, trending towards 100K under what we thought the population would be in 2030. There's a chance, given all of the rezoning since 2009, we've actually hit our housing unit goal. Not affordable housing, but the overall 120K housing unit goal could have actually been met already. As I talk to folks about how to use plans and policies, I think it's important to note that there's a lot of data in there, as we've talked a lot about. The future land use map is a broad stroke, low fidelity, broad brush approach. It's made to be used, as the text in the comprehensive plan states, with higher fidelity policies and higher fidelity area plans. So again, as I'm looking at this, you've got to be careful of folks cherry picking different things and not looking at the comprehensive nature of all the different plans in the area to make decisions. So as we looked at this, height restrictions of 3 to 12 stories and a transition area is supported by all the area plans, as well as many policies and past staff, planning commission, and city council actions. The comprehensive plan, we'll talk a little bit more in detail, but the capital area corridor study, which was brought up, actually focused on this area and has height restriction guidance of 3 stories at the edge of the neighborhood, which this is, or 12 stories well away from the neighborhood, which this is not. Downtown also, the downtown plan also suggested 7 to 8 stories in this area. So all of the localized plans would say less than 12 stories is applicable in this area. It was said in the last planning commission meeting that a height restriction and a transition area would keep the city from being able to realize the density and the vision for this area, given that the capital area corridor story points to less than 12 stories, and it's supported by many policies. That's just patently false. 47 different policies, 11 of which are major, support a transition area and 3 to 12 stories in this area. There's a significant amount of data on transitions and historic preservations. It's important to note that historic neighborhoods are a historic resource, which means that these policies are really important, not only within the neighborhoods themselves, but for the things happening around the neighborhoods. Over 12 stories in this area would violate 30 different comprehensive plan policies, and there's not a single policy that would force height above 12 stories. You can get a lot of density in 12 stories. If you talk about the policies themselves in a little bit more detail, staff has already pointed out this is consistent with downtown edges, appropriate transitions in height, scale, adjacent to neighborhoods. If you like the future land use map, then use the definition of the central business district, tapering down adjacent neighborhoods at a height of 3 to 4 stories. If you want to talk about transit area transitions, tapering down in height and bulk as you start to engage established neighborhoods. There's also policies on less dense development, which you have on the west side of West Street, that would talk about a 45-degree plane. That would also bring it under 12 stories. The transition area allows 12 stories, so that's above what's actually recommended by most plans and policies. There was a assertion at the Planning Commission that transition areas needed area plans. You can look on the text on the slide, it's not in there. DT 1.4 further states there is a case in which area plans are required. That stipulation does not apply in this case. There was a discussion about Winter and Company and all of the work that they did to help us define transition areas. And this area was not one of those areas. It's changed a lot. 30 stories within 250 feet of historic properties and the incompatible land uses that we have Glenwood South creeping into the neighborhood have changed it a lot. There's undeniable support for a transition area. Let's skip the staff report comments. Staff recommendations in 2005 were 5 stories. There was also additional staff comments in the last rezoning case for transitions. Planning Commission recommendations was 5 stories. City Council approved 12 stories. Again, a huge increase in density. But back in 2023, May of 2023, there was a denial that said the City Council wants to see a little bit less height in this area. We want stable tax values. We want a city that thrives, that is economically viable. How much value has already been created since 2009? How much would be created by adding on top of 12 stories in this area? How much would it decrease the value of the historic neighborhood? Does it have to be taken into account? I don't think the dollars outweigh all of the plans and all of the policies that are in place here. Urban planners will tell you that historic preservation, historic neighborhoods, and height transitions benefit the city as a whole. This is not just about benefiting the neighborhood. This is about benefiting our city and having a cohesive urban fabric. There's a lot of new challenges. We need additional protection. We want the city to thrive, but it has to thrive in a way that protects our neighborhood and engages it, not buries it. All other named historic neighborhoods in downtown have a transition area. We need one. There's irrefutable logic for a transition area given the inappropriate height and incompatible land uses that are costing the city a lot of time and effort to try to manage. We feel like the evidence is overwhelming. All the plans in the area, more than 50 policies, past staff, planning commission, and city council actions support this. We need protection today. You can see what's happening in and around our downtown neighborhoods. All other all other named historic neighborhoods have transition zones. We need one. It's undeniable evidence, need, and logic support a transition area in this place. Any questions?
Thank you. Any questions at this time?
Thank you for the presentation. And pulling this together, whether there's any conversation with the current property owners that you are looking to place the transition area on top of?
Very limited. We would love to have conversations with them. I think the incompatible land uses is a tough one when you get into destination nightlife, but the height restrictions of 12 stories in the area didn't seem to be the issue on the Glenwood South side. And then on the other side, West Street, we know that they would like additional height, and so we haven't had additional discussions with them, but we would welcome it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Councilmember Patton?
Hi.
Hello.
Good to see you. I just wanted to make sure not only you, but the neighbors that you've brought with you understand, like mapping this transition zone into a guidance document is it's pretty deep in the weeds. And so when like rezoning is always a legislative decision, it always comes before the council, and we see the slide that says consistent with these policies, inconsistent with these policies. If this were to be in place, there might be like a little flag that says inconsistent with the transition zone.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, it's still a council decision for whichever council is on the body at the time.
That's correct. In past rezonings, they've mentioned not having one as a reason for not working with the neighborhood. So it would be an important one to have, but you're right. It wouldn't prevent it.
Okay. All right. Next, we have Larry Miller, and I would ask for no further disruption, please. Let's let everybody speak. Larry Miller. I was calling you, and Mitch Silver. Whoever's going first.
Good evening, Mayor Baldwin and mayors and members of the City Council. My name is Mitchell Silver, and I'm here to speak in opposition to the comp plan amendment. As some of you may know, I was the former planning director who was the primary author of the comprehensive plan. I'm very honored that the person speaking in support of this did in fact revise their presentation after I presented this at the Planning Commission. I stand by that presentation, which I will share with you right now. The history of Capitol Boulevard is quite long. What the vision for this place would be started back in 2008, followed by the Capitol Boulevard Corridor Plan, because we recognized our city was growing and urbanizing, so there's a long history about focusing on Capitol Boulevard. And in fact, that vision, back in 2012, the Corridor Plan, took a close look at the land uses, the park, and how the corridor would urbanize over time. Planning is planning for the future, and it started well over 2 decades ago. If you look at the creation of the growth framework map and the future land use map, that was carried forward again. And if you look at the purple, it was envisioned at the downtown regional center. The downtown had limited places to grow. We're looking south, west, and north. And as you see in the purple, it was now a regional center with development going along Capitol Boulevard. If you look at the future growth framework map and the land use map, that brown color shows how the density and the land use would extend going north along Capitol Boulevard to anticipate the growth that we were going to have. And so we recognized back in 2008 and 2009, I was part of that effort with Travis and Ken. We looked at almost every parcel and every mixed-use center and looked carefully at this location, recognizing that the central business district would grow north, There would be a park we now know as Smoky Hollow. But then we looked at the west side of Capitol Boulevard and recognized that the existing land uses would serve as a transition between the east side of West Street and the west side. And so we looked very closely at that and had conversations. There was no public opposition at that time. And so, as I stated earlier, downtown was quite small. We knew with a growing population it had to grow north, south, and west. And to grow north, we knew that would be along Capitol Boulevard. We also knew that it was very important at a growing city, we had to look at value capture, return on investment. There were very limited places where the city can grow and urbanize. Capitol Boulevard was part of it. These are two images that were presented many years ago to show how Raleigh would grow. And the whole issue of transitions became a big topic, a hot topic during the comprehensive plan, as well as the code. And we hired a special consultant to come in because in both University Park and Cameron Park, they're very concerned about density along Hillsborough Street. So we introduced this topic of transitions. And as we had promised, the transition zone became part of the UDO, which is in existence today. In terms of implemented transition zones, a lot of them had already gone forward. As I stated, the transition zones recommended the code should also have transition zones. Those were adopted. And also they were mapped as part of the downtown transition area. Having these conversations, we did not hear at that time from the Glenwood South neighborhood, and so we proceeded with these transition zones. If you look at the area next to West Street, you can see it is very mixed use, it is industrial, it is commercial, and now with Peace, it is high density residential. And if you look at the existing transition zones, here are just the 5 that are touching the surrounding area. Very, very different character. But I want to hone in on this point, and I have to disagree with the person speaking in opposition. I purposely put this in because the transition zones became a very controversial topic. Our hope was that it would fade once the code was adopted, and it said that you must prepare an area plan first, adjoining downtown, before you initiate additional transition zones. That was not done in this case. So I state again that CP4 should be denied for a number of reasons, but I will just highlight the fact that the transitions that are being recommended are being done without undertaking an area plan, and then here are all the other 7 considerations that I encourage you to recommend denial of this comp plan amendment. Thank you all very much. I forgot to see if there are any questions.
Okay, we'll let Larry come up.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. I'm here on behalf of the Glenwood South neighborhood. This is a neighborhood that will be impacted by this proposed downtown transition area, both because it includes part of us, and it also because the area to the east along West Street involves, would impact the Smoky Hollow Park, which is of a lot of interest to our neighborhood because it would be the closest green space to our neighborhood. The proposal would inhibit development of areas which could be used to create more dense, walkable neighborhoods. Proposal would tend to inhibit the creation of alternative forms of housing, including affordable housing. Proposal also could inhibit development near transportation corridors. All these public interest policies would be inhibited in order to advance the private interests of a few residents in the Glenwood, Brooklyn neighborhood. It should also be noted that this proposal was submitted without seeking any input from the residents and the businesses that would be significantly impacted by the expansion of the downtown transition zone. Planning staff has looked at the proposal and found that while proposal would provide some protections to the Glenwood, Brooklyn neighborhood, it would be inconsistent with many other policies that are in the public interest. It is not enough for this neighborhood to preserve the character of its community. It seeks to extend its influence and inhibit development in neighboring communities. Glenwood South is a legitimate community also. not historic, but we have 4,300 residents that live there. Expansion of the downtown transition area to exclusively benefit a few residents in Glenwood, Brooklyn would not only create unacceptable limitations on surrounding communities, but it would also limit the City of Raleigh's ability to address future land use proposals. Creating this weapon would allow the Glenwood, Brooklyn neighborhood to thwart the ability of the city to create new opportunities for affordable housing, housing near transit routes, public-private partnerships, and develop underutilized areas in downtown Raleigh. I hope that you will follow the staff's guidance and the Planning Commission's recommendation and deny this request.
You're not
I have
signed.
1 minute. I know I didn't sign up.
You didn't sign up, so I can't do that. I'm sorry. Please, please. Yeah, I'm sorry. I can't, unless you signed up, I can't allow somebody to speak. So. All right. Any questions for the last group is for Larry or Mitchell?
I have a couple. Larry, you back there behind the podium? Hi. Is it the height that is, the limitations on height that is troubling to you, or is it the whole thing overall, or is there something that's kind of specific?
Well, as he pointed out, there are limitations on height already. So why do they need this? What are they getting at other than to add another weapon to oppose any development in the area? I mean, I'm not saying that there's going to be more height or not, but the fact that they want, I mean, Glenwood, Brooklyn is a great neighborhood, but why do they need to inhibit and limit development in Glenwood South? There's plenty of separation there. You got P Street. You go on the other side of P Street. You have mixed use there. It's pretty well shielded, and so I don't think there's going to be tremendous growth height in Glenwood South. The other part of the areas over along West Street is even further separated from Glenwood, Brooklyn. You have a railroad track, you have a buffer of trees, you have a high West Street. So, and again, you have some height limitations there. Why do they need this extra protection? I don't know.
So it's more of a philosophical disagreement than it is like a tactical concern.
Right.
Okay.
There aren't any, in Glenwood South, there aren't any specific proposals going on.
Got it. Okay.
So,
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify. And Mr. Silver, are you still out there? I'll start asking while you get situated. I was wondering if you could shed some light, speaking from your historical standpoint of having implemented the transition zones for the other neighborhoods that are engaged with them. What was the primary motivation? Was it traffic mitigation? Was it form and contextual appropriateness? Like, what was the motivation?
It was primarily height. And there were a lot of conversations we had to ensure that people understood what happened at some of the downtown edges. And so through those conversations, the recommendation is let's put transition zones now in a comprehensive plan and then codify them in the code. They were supposed to go away from the comprehensive plan because you don't want to have a policy and a code basically communicating with one another. But the transition zone stayed in the code as well as the plan. But the intent was there was a concern as downtown was expanding of having a transition down to lower density neighborhoods. The case was different on Capitol Boulevard. And we looked very carefully at the railroad track. We looked at the west side of P Street and said those buildings, that side of the street, offer the transition. And so as we envisioned the downtown regional center growing, we had limited places for higher density growth. Capitol Boulevard was one of them, and we felt the east side of West Street served as a transition to the Glenwood, Brooklyn neighborhood, and that's why it did not have a transition zone, and to my knowledge, one was not requested at that time.
Awesome. And just curious, are you here as a private citizen right now?
No, I am not. But I am a private citizen now.
Sure.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem?
So my question's kind of for staff. There was a conversation, thank you definitely, Mitch, for your comments. And you brought up a fact about the area plan. And in our code, because I don't think any of us know it verbatim, does it require an area study before you do the transitions, a new transition area?
There's no requirement for an area plan for a citizen to initiate a comprehensive plan amendment. There's very little prerequisite for a private citizen to initiate comprehensive plan amendment. Much like a rezoning request, the public can ask for, much like a text change, the public can ask for whatever they want to ask for.
True.
Right? And we have this public process to suss that out, evaluate that, right? The Planning Commission reviews and gives you advice. We take public comment that way. That's really the,
Okay.
Right.
And my other question that I had was because I looked it up because I had forgot the time, the year, but I knew I was on council when it happened. April 5th of 2016 is when we actually put the historic overlay on top of Glenwood, Brooklyn. I don't remember this conversation happening at the time. And I know when the whole UDO was done, all of the other areas that have transition zones, they were already, I guess, mapped. They were already identified. Was this something that should have been considered then and brought up then in 2016, or in order to be consistent as we're hearing from the community?
Right. I hear your question. I would say that historic overlay districts are meant to regulate what's inside the district boundary.
Right.
Not what's adjacent or nearby.
Okay.
There's no regulation for Glenwood, Brooklyn that speaks to stuff outside of the district boundary. And that's true for all the,
correct,
regardless of street side, which this is, or general historic overlay.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I may have more questions later.
Okay, are there any other questions? Okay.
All right. Well, I just want to thank everyone for being here. I feel like we've been here before. It's good to see you. So this is one of those challenging cases in that there are, at least according to the staff report, just as many consistent as there are inconsistent policies backing this up, which means out in the community, there are also many folks very much in favor of this and folks who are not. I will say that makes it tough as a district counselor, as someone who very much wants to represent the folks that live in District D. So I'm just going to, again, note a few things that I'm seeing with this case. There are 44 properties impacted by it, so 31 north of Peace, 13 south of Peace. I am interested in hearing more from some of those property owners. I'd want to understand how this impacts them. I'm also very curious about the history of downtown transition areas throughout downtown. I really appreciate just that little history lesson from Mayor Pro Tem Branch. I did not realize that the historic district came perhaps after the initial decision-making around these downtown transition areas. So that makes more sense to me why maybe it was left out of that mix, at least in terms of the timing. I would like to understand downtown transition areas throughout Raleigh. So one thing that came up in the Planning Commission, I did watch the video. So I did hear some of your points, and I'm sorry that you weren't here or signed up, but I did hear what you had to say there, and I know you represent some other property owners. But one thing that Commissioner Bennett mentioned is her concern over equity in terms of deciding who gets to look at these transition zones, who gets to kind of, put their voice forward. And so I want to make sure as a council that we are thinking holistically about all of the different neighborhoods around downtown. When I look at other areas, I see in some cases the transition zone is very wide. In some cases it's very narrow. In other places it does not exist at all. And so I'm very curious to better understand the histories of all of those neighborhoods around the city before, personally, I want to make a decision on this one. I would also like to say that I think this should go to committee. I'd like to send it to the Growth and Natural Resources Committee and ask staff to bring us as much as they can, if they were here or not, about the history of downtown transition zones, how they were established, what were the reasons, so that we have that full conversation here, because I'm too new to know. I appreciate everyone that's here bringing some of that past to life. And so that would be my recommendation on this. The next GNR committee meeting is November 28th at 4 p.m. I'm going to stop, though, for a moment in case anyone else has any other questions or thoughts as we move forward.
Councilmember Black?
So one of the things I would also like to see with this coming to the Growth and Natural Resource Committee is concessions that can be made, because what I'm hearing are two conflicting interests that both have validity. So when I talked to Roy, you said that you were open to places where things could be transitioned or looked at differently, and that the whole process with the Planning Commission moved very quickly. And so I'm hoping with this conversation, it could be more than just like us understanding the history. I think that's very relevant, but also how we can balance conflicting interests to get to like a mutual goal. I think that's really what's most important. So I'd like to see that too. I don't know how we would bring that back, but I think that's something that would be really important, an important part of the conversation.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yeah, I was going to ask with the information that we're requesting in the time, and I don't, just correct me if I'm wrong, we don't have any immediate zoning cases in this area, do we? Okay, with that being said, I was wondering if we could actually hear this in January to give staff time to pull some of the data and the history as well. And then I think it'll give even the residents time to think about concessions and things. And also I asked the question about, have you talked to some of the local business leaders, business owners in that area? That gives time for that conversation as well, instead of trying to, pull this together in 3 weeks.
Let's ask staff what their, I don't know how much research you've already done or whether this is realistic at the end of November. What's your thoughts?
I think the end of November really would preclude any engagement with property owners in the requested transition area. I don't think we could turn that around.
So are you okay with moving this to January?
I think what I'll say is that's fine with me as long as we don't have any cases that are impacted. And so I wouldn't want to make any decisions on any cases, without figuring this out. And so I think this does give us more time. And I hope for neighbors that are concerned about anything coming, I'm just committing here, I don't want to move forward on any case until we figure this piece out.
Well, staff just said there are no.
They said there are none.
There's no rezoning cases impacted by this, correct? Correct. Okay, thank you.
Nothing in the hopper.
That's correct. And the
Okay.
recent case here, if I remember correctly, would have to ask for a waiver from you to refile.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask staff, do we leave this hearing open and refer it to committee?
There are no timing requirements around amendment of comprehensive plan, and really the code doesn't make much of a provision for an applicant to amend their comprehensive plan amendment. There's not really a mechanism in the code for them to revise. They can certainly communicate to you if they're going to ask for something different. and you have the opportunity to act on the request or some variation of that, or you really have a
So
lot of legislative leeway.
What's the proper legal thing for us to do?
I think it would be
Close the
fine to
hearing?
close the hearing. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, close the hearing then and refer it to GNR.
Yeah, Growth and Natural Resources. That'll be my motion to close the hearing and move it to GNR.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Okay, that was unanimous. Thank you. Okay, and then next we have comprehensive plan amendment, CP 520, can't read, 523 Hillsborough Street Plan.
Good evening.
We have,
Hannah.
we have nobody signed up in opposition.
So this is a comprehensive plan amendment CP 523. It is a privately initiated request to amend map T1, the street plan, specifically a designation of a portion of Hillsborough Street from Avenue 4-lane divided to Avenue 3-lane parallel parking. The Planning Commission recommends approval. So we'll situate ourselves. This is west of downtown, portion of Hillsborough Street from Youth Center Drive down to the intersection with Western Boulevard. So we're west of 440. It ends, you can see where future Western BRT will run shortly just before the Jones Franklin Road and the extension of Western Boulevard. And this also is near a recent KC 3422. So this portion of Hillsborough Street is built out to sort of several sections. So I'll go through those now, going from near Youth Center Drive. Hillsborough Street is 3 lanes, so 1 lane in either direction and a turn lane in the middle. As we go farther south, particularly underneath the railroad bridge, it transitions to 2 lanes. And then finally transitions at the intersection with Western Boulevard to 4-lane divided. So this is the street plan currently. It's Avenue 4-lane divided along this portion and much of Hillsborough Street. The request would modify the map to look like this. So Avenue 3-lane parallel parking on this portion. So the current designation, Avenue 4-lane divided, has 109-foot right-of-way, 2 lanes, travel lanes in either direction, a median on either side, and then sidewalk and bike lane behind the curb. The requested designation is a smaller right-of-way, 1 travel lane in either direction, and then either a turn lane or a median in the middle, and then also a sidewalk and bike lane behind the curb. Sidewalk is required to be a little bit bigger than the current designation. And so the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan. These policies are, consistency is coming from the fact that the projected vehicle counts on this portion are projected to be able to be are within the capacity of a 3-lane divided avenue, and then also the sort of additional space for pedestrians that would be required. No inconsistent policies were identified, and then the Planning Commission did recommend approval 9-0. So happy to answer any questions you have. Sure, and just add again that this site is adjacent to a recent request at Youth Center Drive and Hillsborough Street, the Z3422. I believe the applicant is associated with that project. Oh, sure. Yeah, I realize that's Youth Center Drive. That's the site there.
Do we have any additional questions? Okay, I have no one signed up in opposition. I have 4 people who signed up to speak in support. Ashley Terraza, Collier Marsh, Michael Gribble, and Nate Boquin. I don't know if there's one spokesperson. Okay.
Good evening, Mayor Baldwin, members of council. I'm Collier Marsh with Parker Poe at 301 Fayetteville Street, and I'll cover everything on behalf of our team. So yes, this is a comprehensive plan amendment, which I think offers a number of, mutual benefits, not only for my client, but for other folks in the area, and addresses some concerns or comments that are originally raised by city transportation staff at that time. So my client is in the development process for the property at the corner of Youth Center Drive and Hillsborough Street. So that's this section right here, recently zoned to NX5CL or ULCU. So an urban limited frontage, as you'll see, those urban frontages are prominent in the area. The subject section is from Black Star to Black Star here, from Youth Center Drive to Western Boulevard. That's what's encompassed in this request. So this was brought by transportation staff, or brought to our attention in early meetings, that the traffic counts, the projected traffic counts for this area in the future don't warrant a 4-lane divided, and actually come short of the 3-lane section we're proposing. So there's more than enough capacity with the section we're proposing. And then when you look at the urban form map, the development in the area, and the desire to promote walkability, to have more pedestrian-friendly uses in this area, it seemed like a no-brainer to reduce the section to something that's far more pedestrian-friendly, which is what we're proposing with this request. And so this just shows the change, comparing the existing transportation plan or street plan to the as changed, so going from that 4-lane to the 3-lane divided with parallel parking. And the changes overall, some benefits for all the folks within this corridor. The overall right-of-way width goes from 109 feet down to 95 feet. If you think of some of those existing property owners that are actually on the other side from my client, some of those commercial uses that back up to the railroad tracks, there's not a lot of space. So that extra frontage makes a lot of difference for future uses and development of those sites. The other benefit here is that we're getting wider sidewalks with this new street section, again, promoting walkability in the area. This slide just shows the comprehensive plan guidance that led to this discussion, that the future here is envisioned for mixed use. It's not envisioned to get as many cars through as fast as possible. The urban form map indicates that we want people to be able to walk here, not dodge cars. So we thought it was a pretty common sense solution. I think staff agreed, all consistent policies, no inconsistent policies. So with that, we're happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Councilmember Harrison?
Yeah, and this might actually be for staff. I'm curious about bike lanes in either case. Would there be bike lanes? Does that, how does that get put in here? Because I'm very, just want to say, in favor of this proposal overall. I think this is going to be very good for walkability. There does need to be additional parking in this area. I know the business as well. My husband works at one of them across the street. But I'm just curious, on the bike piece.
Good evening. I'm Monique Guint with Transportation. So specifically along this frontage, that this street does include bike lanes. At site review, as far as connectivity and what is actually put in place, it would need to be reviewed by the plan reviewer to see for consistency.
So let me just confirm. You said it would require bike lanes?
It does require bike lanes, yes. As far as what that actual facility that's put in place, and as far as the connectivity to the adjacent parcels, that will be flushed out at site review.
So just help me think through it. There's many other businesses down the street, that are not, they're not new, so they're not going to necessarily be changing their frontage. So would you put a bike lane there in front of this apartment complex if you didn't have one down the street? I mean, how would you decide?
I'm going to reach out. I'm going to phone a friend real fast.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, there are some options. I'm sorry, I'm going to flag them down.
That's fine. And I'll just say a few more things. Something that I'm excited about in this area is the walkability to Western Boulevard, because we're going to have BRT there. And so the neighborhood that is just north of this apartment complex is really, I'm hopeful, going to have a lot more connectivity to the neighborhood south on Western. So I'm just thinking about that whole mix there. How can you get around?
Absolutely. Bradley Kimbrell, Transportation Department. So the proposed cross-section from the UDO on our screen does show bike lane and sidewalk infrastructure. Therefore, redevelopment along the corridor would include these features. As far as along existing properties, not under redevelopment, it would really be upon the city's council's preference to put forward a plan to improve the corridor. So that would be an act of council to authorize staff to look at a larger project.
So let's say they're moving forward with this, they're going to have bike lanes, and we didn't put anything forward for a bigger plan. Are they just bike lanes to nowhere?
Fair question. And I believe within the context of the site review, it would really come down to how much frontage we had, adjacent infrastructure at the time of submittal. Also, this is a DOT corridor. We would solicit their input as well.
I think Councilmember Melton might have something on this.
Yeah, I was just going to add that this is sort of an ongoing frustration I've had because we do rely on the private sector to fill in these missing gaps when they come in and do redevelopments. There's actually a quote bike lane to nowhere right now in adjacent to the warehouse district. They just finished the platform apartment complex, and there's just like maybe a block of bike lane right in front of that just doesn't do anything until other folks come in and plug the gaps. And so I do think, City Manager, when we're looking at upcoming budgets, this has been an ongoing thing where I do think we need to be proactively going in and finding these missing connections. And I do think with bus rapid transit, we're going to be doing that anyway, those first and last mile connections. So maybe when the Western BRT starts, they'll come in and plug the gaps. But to the extent that they don't, I do think we need to be a little more proactive because, like you pointed out, the plots that redevelop will have them, but then if there's longstanding businesses or residential areas that aren't planning to redevelop, we're just going to continue to have these gaps. And I actually think when we updated our UDO with bike lanes, someone who spoke against said, you're going to end up with all these gaps and bike lanes to nowhere. But I think doing it that way was a good first step, but we definitely need to take it further.
Yeah, and I just, I want to speak about, the Westover neighborhood in particular. The very first rezoning case that we had at this council was here, and so there were concerns about the density of the apartment complex and how that would impact the neighborhood. And so I really have a commitment to making sure that we are improving that walkability, bikeability as we are bringing in more housing. If we don't take care of our infrastructure at the same time, then we're doing a disservice to our residents. And so I guess I'll just put it forward that I really advocate for the full, complete street from, the Youth Center Drive to Western. Again, thinking about that BRT connectivity, I think it would improve a lot of the neighborhood walkability. And it's also where everyone is going to the fair. There's a lot of, movement there that could be a lot safer. So I'll just throw that out there. But at this time, I'm ready to make a motion to move forward on this case unless others have questions.
Okay, I will close the hearing then.
Just give me a moment. I got to find the words.
I got the do. Yeah.
Full language?
Yeah.
Okay, I am motioning this forward.
I moved.
I think you.
I move to approve the comp plan amendment.
It's been a long day, I guess. Anyhow, thank you very much. Motion is second, and all in favor?
Aye.
That was unanimous. All right. With that,
Real quick, just Madam Mayor, I just want to highlight something that Councilwoman Harrison said about bike lanes. That goes back to the conversation I mentioned earlier, when we talk about the school, like prioritizing, because we have a lot of competing issues, and there's only so many projects of restriping and paving roads that we can do in a given time or year.
You're talking about the
The
Emicon.
Illicon Elementary. So we really gotta, that's why I'm glad we're gonna have the further conversation next year to really look at this again holistically. I think transportation said we look at this probably every 6 months, but it's something that's important.
Okay. All right, with that, we are adjourned. Thank you so much.